Like Mark said, I'm just going to tell my story today. It's my story. It's not better than yours. It isn't told just for dramatic effect. I have no desire to compare and contrast stories afterwards. It's just mine, just like yours is yours. The good, the bad, and the ugly, what God has taught me, and what I'm still learning today. My story revolves all around my father. My dad was an incredible man, a lover, a gruff man. His normal tone of voice was this. He yelled all the time, "How are you? Good." That was how he talked nonstop. So I never knew if I was in trouble or not. He was always just rough and gruff. I was an only child for the first 8 years of my life, and my sister came along. Everything was hunky-dory. My family life seemed to be stable. I was in church all the time. I was doing like all of the churchy kinds of things. My dad worked his tail off. He had different jobs that he bounced back and forth around, but finally had landed a place where he was gonna thrive, I think, for the rest of his career. One night coming home from a sports practice, I got home, walked into the house. I was in middle school, and my sister was about 3 at the time. I was about 11. And they set me down at the kitchen table, my parents did, and they told me that things just weren't working out between them. And I was just floored. It was one of those moments where you get told that, and you're like, I think everything's fine. I mean, I'm 11. I'm really smart. You should take my advice. Like, everything's great. They talked for an hour around the table. There were tears shed. I was destroyed. At the end of the night, it was just, this was known. They were gonna take a break, and in a few weeks, Dad was gonna leave and probably go stay with his parents for a while and just see if they could work it out. I woke up the next morning for school, he was gone. He was gone. And so I looked at my mom and I said, not the smartest kid, but 3 weeks doesn't equal 10 hours, right? It's just better this way. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what it's better this way meant. Well, it never got better. They ended up divorcing, and my dad had been making some terrible choices in his life at the time that I wasn't aware of. My dad was the guy who was a kind enough father to not smoke in the house. He would go outside. He wouldn't drink in the house. He would drink somewhere else before he would come home. But I didn't know all that. It wasn't until about 1.5 years after my parents were divorced and my mom had gone away for a trip and my dad had come back to our house to watch my sister and I at our house. He was sleeping in the bed, his bed. He was making sure that before he left, he would spray his cologne on the bed, hoping and praying that my mom would take him back. We went out on a Saturday afternoon to a little putt-putt golf course, and my sister and I were playing putt-putt with my dad, and something weird was happening. I didn't quite understand what was going on, but my dad was just weird. He was just off. He was saying things that didn't make sense. He was slurring his words. He was a hot mess. And I remember looking at him. The curse of having a photographic memory about these kinds of things is that it's great for fun stories, but when you have to relive the junk, it's like it just rips it open again. I can take you to the spot on that golf course right now where I looked at my dad and said, "Dad, are you drunk?" "Well, why would I do a thing like that?" That's what he said to me. And I said, "You don't have the right to lie to me. You just drove 10 miles across town. Are you really drunk?" "I've just had a little. It's not a big deal." My dad was notorious for buying a bottle of vodka about that big and putting it down in one swoop and just being done. And in that moment, on that golf course, started a journey, a spiral of out of control between my dad and I that lasted until, well, I think till now even. I was about 13 at that time, and as we left the golf course that day, I grabbed the keys from my dad and said, "I'm driving home." And he just said, "Whatever." And I got in his GMC Jimmy gray. That thing would purr. And we drove, terrified, just in a town of 50,000 people, I just did this. I've never prayed more in my life. I'm 13, I'm driving through town. We make it back to our house, and I crawl in a corner and just don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And that began a process in his life of every weekend, every Friday night, when the work week was over, Friday night was his night to decompress and drink until he just couldn't see straight. And I was the good child. I was the good older child. I followed through on the visitation agreement from the divorce. I went to his house every other weekend. By the time I got older and had my own car, I'd leave all of my clothes in my car, especially for church, so that my clothes wouldn't get smoky in his house, so that when I got to church, it didn't smell like a cigarette butt. And for the next 3 years of my life, on Friday nights, every other weekend, I knew the routine. My mom would drop me off and my sister to my dad's house on 10th Street in Columbus, Indiana. And he'd say, "What's for dinner?" And I'd say, I don't know what's for dinner. Like, I'm 13. Well, let's go get something. I'd take the keys to the car, and I'd drive us through Columbus, Indiana. We'd go to the Kroger. We'd rent a movie at the Kroger video rental store. We'd get some fried chicken, a Banquet fried chicken frozen meal. We'd take it home. We'd put it in the oven. We'd play Mario Kart on Super Nintendo, on Nintendo 64 after that came out. We'd play. He would be a hot mess. He'd verbally abuse everyone in the room except for me. For some reason, I was the lucky one. He would look at my stepsisters and tell them, "Congratulations, you're gonna be a Walmart greeter the rest of your life, and you're gonna work at White Castle." Every day of their life, he told them that. He was a mean guy, but he loved me, and he was my dad, right? So we're getting through life, and I'm still being the good kid. I'm doing all this all the way through high school. I do this all the way through high school. I go every weekend to my dad's. My dad looks at me and my mom at the end of high school and says, "There's no way I can help with college. I'm making hardly enough money just to survive." And we knew that, so somehow the Lord made a way for me to get to Olivet. Made it to Olivet. My dad came and saw me twice when I was a student at Olivet. He came once during my freshman year in the fall semester. We hung out, got pizza, he left the next day, and he came on graduation day. That was it. He was invested in my life as much as he could be. Looking back now, I think he was doing the best he could. But still a hot mess, still struggling with alcoholism. Had grown in his job a little bit, but was still struggling as my sister grew up and got older too. He loved my wife, Michelle, more than I think anyone on the earth. He just, when Michelle showed up in our life, it was like something clicked with him. And my wife is very much a redhead and very much not afraid to say what she's thinking to your face. And I, being a person who was so afraid to say anything to my dad for fear of him hitting me or verbally hitting me, or just scared of what he would do, I would not call him out on anything, and he would just sit there and Michelle would just give it to him, and I'd be like, "Man, I knew I picked you for a reason. Like, this is great." Like, she just hit him hard with stuff. We got married. He came down to our wedding in Missouri. We ate at the restaurant where we ate with my dad about a month and a half ago. I sat at the table and cried like a baby, thinking about my dad sitting in this room, eating a meal. In case you don't know, I'm broken. I'm a broken guy, okay? It's only gonna get worse from here on out, so get ready, all right? I'm broken. I got married, my wife and I got married. Michelle, we moved to Michigan. Dad never really made it to Michigan except 2 times. He came when I was ordained in 2003, and then he came in 2005 for my daughter McKenna's first birthday. And we had spent some time, Michelle and I had gone down before McKenna was born and surprised my dad for his 50th birthday. And we got down to Columbus and our car just stopped working. And so he just gave us his car. We drove his car back and he got it fixed for me. My dad was such a nice guy. He would do anything for anyone. He was a lover, loved people, but just couldn't love himself, right? And he would do anything for us. He makes his way up to Michigan in 2005 for my daughter McKenna's first birthday party. It's at my church where I was working at the time. And he came in and it was scary. Michelle and I looked at each other and said, what is going on? This isn't Donnie. He was the original Smitty. Well, I'm sure there's millions more, but he was the original Smitty in my life. What's up with Donnie? My dad had a routine every day. He'd get up and he would shower and he would shave his face. And then when he would get home, he would shave again because he didn't like facial hair. And he just had this unkept beard before, like, that was cool, right? He just had this huge, massive beard. And he was just a mess. Like, he couldn't make eye contact. Like, if he was looking here, he'd just drift off this way and start. It was weird. He would just sit there and just kind of just smile and just. And we got done and I thought, what a jerk. I mean, we've tried to include, he didn't even come up when McKenna was born. I was bitter about that. We've tried so hard to include him in things, but he's always choosing the bottle. He's always choosing this. He's always choosing that. What in the world? He was just a wreck. He left and went home with my sister, and I remember looking at Michelle saying, I just don't know how much more of this I can take with him. That was in June. Fast forward to Christmas Eve, 2005. My dad was in terrible health too. He had diabetes and he was on the verge of emphysema from smoking 2-pack cigarettes a day for, almost 40 years of his life at that point. And I get a phone call before Michelle and I leave for our Christmas Eve service at South Church of the Nazarene in Lansing, Michigan. I get a phone call from my sister and she's like, I'm up at Aunt Connie's house. That's where my dad was living because his third marriage had fallen apart at this time. And he was he was a hot mess. I'm at Connie's. Connie was my dad's twin sister. I had the most Southern Indiana aunts and uncles. Connie, Ronnie, Donnie, and Dixie. I mean, it doesn't get any more Southern Indiana than that, right? We're at Connie's and Dad can't walk. I was like, what? It's like he can't walk. He's on one side of the room, and I said, let's go get some food, and he cannot walk. I said, is he refusing to walk? Because he's kind of a jerk, He likes to play jokes on people. He likes to be in control. No, he literally can't. Give him the phone. Hello, Matthew. Hi, Dad. Dad, can you not walk? If you can walk and you're being a punk now, that's a great joke. But you got to stop because Janessa's freaking out. Nope. I said, Dad, you need to go to the hospital. Okay, red flag there. Most non-compliant patient on the earth. My wife, a nurse, yelled at the man every week of his life to take medicine. Okay, so I say, Janessa, take him to the hospital. Take him down to Columbus, take him to the hospital. We go to church. I remember what we sang in that service that night. I remember what I was listening to on the ride home in my car. I get home, my phone rings. It's my sister, and she's wailing on the phone. I can't understand her. And it's kind of like one of those scenes out of a movie that's happening in real life. And he has a brain tumor. That's all I can make out of it. And I was like, oh. There was a big snowstorm that night. We couldn't leave, so we had to get up early Christmas morning, which was a Sunday, and make the 4.5-hour drive down to Columbus. That's all we knew. We just knew he was in the hospital. He had a brain tumor. By this point, Christmas morning on our way down, he had gone from compliant to really just not even with it at all. He couldn't even recognize my sister, didn't know who she was. We get there Christmas Eve afternoon, and we walk in the room. He just smiles. And he says, hi, Matt. I was like, well, that's a win. He had no idea who Michelle was, none. She was just a beautiful redhead in the room. He was just a mess. And so about 3 p.m, a neurologist comes in to see us and says, yeah, he's got a brain tumor. I was like, okay, talk to me about that. I'm asking Michelle all these questions because she's the nurse. What's a large brain tumor? Well, brain tumors are large. We don't want them. But bigger than tips of your finger, that's bad. Neurologist walks in. How big is this thing? It's the first thing we got to know. It's about the size of a softball. It's right behind here. It's cutting off his ability for his motor skills and for his speech, his cognitive ability. That's the reason why he's just a mess now. So we're giving him high doses of steroids to try to decrease the swelling inside of his brain so that he might have a little bit of life to come back. My dad and I love Christmas. My love of Christmas is because of that man. So when you get mad when we decorate the wreck in November, you can blame my father, okay? Just tweet it, it's fine. His name is Don Smith. He was a great man. Our tradition was to watch Christmas Vacation. And that night, my wife and I laid in his hospital bed with him, and we watched Christmas Vacation on my laptop. And he would just giggle and make eye contact with us and watch and smile. He'd giggle, not at the funny parts, he would just giggle. He was so out of it. The next morning, neurologist came back in to see us and told us there's only one neurosurgeon in the state of Indiana that would see him. And of course, he was on holiday for 2 weeks in Europe. Because, I was ready to open that thing up and pull the thing out now. And so we're gonna have to, for 2 weeks, hold off until he gets back into the country. So he's probably gonna have to go into a rehab center for a couple weeks, and then he'll be fine. So fast forward, the steroids work. He comes out of it. Within 2 days, he's out of the hospital, walking, knowing us. We see Dr. Painter a couple weeks later. He's like, yeah, I can do this surgery. I can do it. We try another procedure about 2 weeks later to go in and take a peek and see just how advanced it was. The tumor had grown into different places where if they tried to cut it off in some places, it would cut off his optic nerve. It was connecting to his vision. It was intense. It was crazy. January 23rd, 2006, 12-hour brain surgery. They pull out 95% of the tumor. The entire time leading up to this whole thing, Dr. Painter is fairly convinced that it's benign. Fairly convinced. My dad woke up for about 2 hours total after his surgery over the next month before he died. He woke up about 4 days after the surgery. We found out 4 days before he died in February that it was cancer. They had finally found a pathologist at Johns Hopkins that was able to identify it. By that time, they had found cancer on his jaw, and they suspected that it was all stemming out of his lung cancer. We transferred him to a nursing home facility. And 36 hours before he died, in a quiet moment when a lot of family had left, and it was just Michelle and I and my dad in the room, he woke up. And I had to look at my dad in the eye and tell him he was dying. And he said, I know. But on January 23rd, in the hospital room before he went into his surgery, I looked at my dad in the eye and I said, okay, quote, I'm convinced that God doesn't care nearly as much about this surgery as he cares about you. Would you just give your life to him? He said, yes. And I sat there in the room and I prayed with my dad. And I believe today that my dad is having a great time in heaven. I believe it because I believe God is faithful. I believe it. And as I looked at him and told him he was dying, I said, hey, was that true when we prayed in the hospital room? Do you remember praying, asking Jesus, just change me? And he said, you know I do. And 36 hours later, I held his hand and watched him die. I cried on the way home, and that was it for a year. I was the family pastor. My dad wasn't a church guy. I did his funeral. I preached my dad's funeral. Didn't shed a tear. Mark sat in the back of the room, I think praying for me constantly. I just pushed through. It was on Ash Wednesday in 2006. I got done at the graveside, said last goodbyes, and I looked at my best friend, who was one of my youth volunteers at church, and said, I'll be home tonight for youth group. And he said, you're an idiot. No, you're not. I said, yeah, I'll be there. No, didn't go home. Next year, I was fine until February 22nd, I believe it was, 2007, John Mayer Continuum Winter Tour, standing at that show in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and all of a sudden, I start to feel weird things in my body, and I have a complete meltdown, a complete panic attack, and I literally think I'm gonna die. I go to my friend Travis's house over in Grand Rapids a couple weeks later, and he's like, dude, are you okay? I was like, yeah, I think I'm dying. I got to get to the doctor, man. I feel all these things. My muscles are twitching, and I have headaches, and I've got brain cancer too, and I'm sure I've got some other terrible disease. And he said, dude, your dad died a year ago, and you haven't really grieved at all. You think that could be it? And I was like, no chance. No. Michelle would be like, dude, you haven't acknowledged this death in a year. Don't you think that this is probably it? No chance. I'm just gonna keep going. And literally could not function. I would go to work and I'd come home at 10 in the morning because I was so gripped by fear and anxiety. My pastor said, go see somebody. He paid for me to go to see a counselor, and the counselor talked to me and he said, do you realize how connected your mind and body are? Do you know that men ages 26 to 35, and some of the research that's been done out of Harvard, that one of the number one manifestations of men who 26 to 35 who experience incredible loss abruptly is hypochondria, because you don't feel like you're invincible anymore. I was like, I'm not a hypochondriac. I just know I'm dying. I'm just dying. Like, mirror, hello, Matt. And I was just praying. There were two of the darkest months of my life. I was just praying, just like I am right now. Can I just see the sun, Lord? Can I see green grass? Can trees bloom? Can flowers bloom? Can I just see something? And in mid-April 2007, after 2 months that I can only describe as hell, on a walk through our neighborhood, pushing the stroller of little McKenna and Michelle, it had just rained and a bunch of earthworms were on the sidewalk. And she stopped, Daddy, what's that? And I said, it's an earthworm. I said, you want to see it? Sure. I reached down and I picked it up, put it in my hand, and she touched it, and I touched it. I was like, isn't that cool? We better put it back in the grass so it can live. I set it in the grass, and I got behind the stroller and started pushing, and I literally I started to shake and cry and sob, and Michelle said, what is wrong with you? And I said, my dad used to take me fishing all the time. I never baited my own hook. I've never touched an earthworm in my life. He was the only one that did that for me. And in that moment, I realized, oh, this is about my father. I'm not dying, except I still think I am a lot of the times. Even today. Have I had that thought today? Yes. So I went and saw counselors. I talked to people, had people speak into my life. And since then, I've been on a journey of understanding what grief is, of understanding what self-awareness is, and understanding that I am not alone. Thank you for singing that today. I am not alone. About 2 weeks ago, driving home from an intramural basketball game, I had that song on repeat in my car, and I sobbed in my car because it was the January 23rd. And I was like, oh, this is about the time I was seeing my dad after surgery after 12 and a half hours. I'm not alone, and I'm not dying. It's a journey. I'm still struggling. I'm still trying to figure out who I am. I don't have anything all together at all. But I've learned some things in 13 years on my journey of my daddy issues. And so what I want you to take away from today, if anything, is one of these things. I've written them down. I usually don't do this, but if I don't, I won't say it correctly. They may not be all for you. They may be for one person in the room. And if that's the case, that's one enough. Here's what I've learned about grief, fear, anxiety, and life. And by the way, I'm preaching to myself because I'm not good at this stuff still. Feel what you feel when you feel it. When you feel something, own it, receive it, and don't suppress it. I often don't do this well. It's okay to be sad when you're sad. But fighting that by saying, I've got to be happy and put on a good face, only suppresses that real feeling so that when it finally does surface, you explode and implode at the same time. Trust me, sitting on a year's worth of grief for your dad, who was never the dad that you wished he would have been, but he was still your dad, that's a hard thing to deal with. And 13 years later, I still am. Second, when you feel like you've lost your grip, trust me, God has not lost his. I heard Dr. Ball mention this in her chapel, that even though you've walked through the valley of the shadow of death, you can fear no evil because he is with us, but it's after you walk through the valley of the shadow. I'd never put that together, and I'm supposed to. He's with us. My dad was not himself. He had lost all control of his emotions, his physical abilities, and so much more. The things that happened in public with that man are some of the most embarrassing things that I could ever talk. I don't want to talk about them. But it wasn't his fault. And God was just as close to him as he is to you and me. Saying someone is lost, that's a tricky one. Because if something or someone by definition is lost, you don't know where they are. I have confidence that I know exactly where my dad is. I don't think he's lost. I don't think I've lost him. He's not here, but I know where he is. I think he's fine. I think he's good. I think he's proud. And I think he's with Jesus. And that seems like a win to me. Don't be afraid to talk to someone, especially a counselor. I owe the deepest debt in the world to John McPhail, my counselor in Okemos, Michigan. He helped me navigate some of the darkest days of my life. I was scared to see him initially. I was like, I'm not a man if I do this. Guys, hear me out. Guys, you are not less of a man. There is no shame in you talking to someone if you can't figure life out. That makes you more of a man when you ask someone for help. Trust me. Listen, I'm a broken man. I've learned so much from people that I've put in my life. And when you realize that you don't have to impress anyone or inconvenience anyone or convince yourself that you can just push through it, there is such a sense of relief and self-awareness that you can actually begin to really live. Tears are good. A good cry is good. Surround yourself with people that you can trust to speak truth into your life. There were people in my life like Harold DeMott, John McPhail, Ken McNulty, Travis. I'm saying their names because I have to, because it's good for me. Kelly Downs, Chelsea Spies, Kathy Steinecker, Mark Holcomb, Paul Johnson, my group chat friends that are just junior high in nature and we're all 40 years old. Dwayne Mills, Cynthia Taylor, Mark Holcomb, and there are countless more. And most of all, my wife, Michelle, the saint of all women on the earth. She has literally walked through the darkest days of my life and still has stuck with me. I couldn't have done this without you, that's for sure. Realize that the junk you deal with in life comes and goes. I've learned that this fear that I've dealt with will never really go away. And the things that you deal with, they're not really gonna go away. It just comes a little more infrequently than it used to. Having the courage to face it when it pops up gives you the chance to not be controlled by it, but live in the moment. About 6 years ago, next month, we had a tragedy on our campus, an unexpected loss of a student who wasn't just a student. She was really a part of our family, watched my kids, best friend to my kid's sister. And could I have ever believed in a million years that that would have happened? And when her dad called and asked me to give the eulogy at her funeral, I was hesitant. For my dad's funeral, I was like, I'm gonna do this because I'm the pastor. I was hesitant. And I had the moment where when I began to speak in that church, I had to do the turnaround and cry behind so nobody could see me because I was so broken. Hey, it's okay to be broken. It's okay. And what I went through in 2006 helped me to deal with what happened in 2013. Last, know that when you're living in the shadows, it's okay. There were countless days and nights when I just wondered, would this ever go away? Would there ever be a time when the shadows would subside? I've learned a lot about being in the shadows, and I've learned that shadows can only appear when there is light. And there is light. The Apostle John said that what has come into being in him, Jesus, was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Luke even tells a story after Jesus is resurrected that on a road to Emmaus, two broken men who thought Jesus' body had been stolen and now the whole world is going to end, Jesus walked with them even when they couldn't recognize him. Listen, friends, Jesus is with you even when you don't know it. He's there. He's walking with you. The clouds will clear up, shadows will disappear, the sun will blaze down, flowers and trees are gonna bloom. I still believe it, even though this is the worst winter on earth. Death doesn't have the final word, nor will it ever. And in the midst of brokenness in your life, you can realize, like I did, that I'm okay. I'm not great, but I'm okay. Let me pray for you. God, you've given us all a story to tell. And our story plays out every day in our lives. Some of us have great stories. They're beautiful. Some of us have broken tales. And we struggle. But I pray that wherever we find ourselves on this day, that we would be faithful to know that you are with us and that we don't have to do this alone. Put people in our lives that are there for us and help us to rely and trust in you. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.